For our next chapter in our Shared Stories series, I'm very excited to introduce my colleague and good friend, Nolana Newton. Nolana and I first met more than 10 years ago while working together in the outpatient physical therapy department at Swedish Medical Center at First Hill. Despite our basketball rivalry, Nolana graduated from Duke and myself from UConn. I've always had a deep admiration and respect for Nolana, both professionally and personally. A lot has changed in our profession since we first worked together, for sure. And so much more has changed in our society and immediate communities. So first off, I thought I'd ask you to share a few things about yourself, your background, both personal and professional.
Sure, I could do that. Professionally, like Rob said, I'm a PT. I've been a PT in the Seattle area for, 17, 18 years now. And been a PT overall about 22. So I've been around the Seattle area for a long time. Was in private practice as a staff PT for half of my career, and this second half has been at Swedish, and it's morphed over the years. Was mostly outpatient ortho sports med, and now I'm primarily seeing pelvic health patients. It's a lot of fun. It's been a journey.
Where did you practice before you were in Seattle? Also
So I was down in Vancouver, Washington. I was right on the border. Worked at Rebound Physical Therapy down there at Southwest Washington Medical Center. So I was down there for a couple of years.
So that is an interesting experience in the sense of, so you've practiced professionally all your career in Washington, or the Pacific Northwest, if we generalize, but you went to school in the South. So what was that like growing up here, going to school there, coming back to practice here? Were there any things that were different for you, or what was that experience like?
Yeah. So I thank you for saying that. I was born and raised here in Seattle. Went to high school here, did undergrad here. I started at Seattle U. I was at Seattle U for a couple of years, and then I finished up at UW and wanted to experience a different part of the country. I thought I was going to end up in New York or DC. That was primarily where I put most of my feelers out for school. And my younger sister, went to Duke undergrad. She's 2 years younger than me. And I went out to visit her in my last year at UW before we started school, and liked the area, but it was very different. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. North Carolina, the South, I would say for the first time in my life, I was not one of one, in classes, in stores, my experience there were a lot more Black people in the South and in North Carolina in particular, and it was a very big growing experience for me.
In what way?
Well, things that you can get used to being the only person of color in a class is I would say in Seattle. I could get very, very used to that, or I was very used to that. And moving to the South, that really, I used to say, I learned to pick my head up and look people in the eye when I was in the South. because here in Seattle, that's, we kind of joke about it, the Seattle freeze. You don't look at people eyes down and you're walking around. But there you're running across people, and particularly in the Black community, you make eye contact with people, you say something, you speak. And so it was, there's a warmth,
Mhm.
that comes from living in that kind of environment,
Mm.
that you don't have that same warmth growing up here in Seattle.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, coming from the Northeast myself, there definitely
Right.
are communication differences and styles that
Yeah.
just need some getting used to for sure.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Hmm.
Well, what is it about our project Shared Stories that drew your interest to participate, if I might ask?
Well, it's important to have a voice. I mean, it's important to be a voice. It's important to represent for your community. And I take that, it's very important to me to do that. And we need more. You know what? I'm going to back up. I have 3 kids. We're also growing up here in Seattle, and I have been very intentional about them growing up in communities of color, and having that kind of community and having that kind of exposure. I've been very intentional about that. And so this project it's an extension of that. Representation matters. Being a voice for your community matters. And so the things that I'm trying to promote to my kids, and uh those are the same things that I need to bring out for myself, in and be a voice, be seen and be a voice.
Yeah, and that's amazing to be self-aware of that, and or uh, acknowledge that and be able to pass that onto your
Hmm.
kids, or influence them
Hmm.
that way.
Hmm.
Certainly, as a father myself, I think about that. Um,
Hmm.
what am I going to share with my daughter in that regard? Um,
Absolutely.
it's kind of a good segue. I was
Hmm.
doing a bit of demographics research, and according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics in 2020, of all employed physical therapists, nearly 78% were white, 15%
Hmm.
were Asian, approximately 5% Black, and approximately 4% Hispanic Latino.
Hmm.
Um, Given these statistics, I was curious what drew you to become a physical therapist. And for a bit of a deeper context into my interest in this question is this notion that we had some feedback in a survey that we did early last year about DEI to membership, and one of the comments that still sticks with me to this day is that someone felt that um, DEI was a feel-good activity that um, was just taking time away from um, time that could be otherwise spent taking care of patients. And I thought, well, this is a part of all of it, right? It's not just the taking
Hmm.
care of patients; it's us, colleagues, right? Um, and I thought, in that vein, asking what drew you to become a physical therapist in the first place? I mean, you mentioned growing up in an area in which you were the only minority in your class. You moved to an area of the country that's completely the opposite. Um,
Hmm.
what made you want to become a PT in the first place?
I was always drawn to science and math. Those were always um, subjects that I enjoyed, and so I knew I wanted to do something like that. Now my parents are both college educated, and both teachers. They're both teachers, and my dad in particular was a science and math teacher. And so I knew I did not want to be a teacher. Let me tell you that. I did not. um,
But we
but
are
I was,
still, right? We are.
yeah, I know. Isn't that
We got you.
funny? Yeah, I know. Isn't that funny? Oh, I know somebody else said that to me pretty early in my career, and I went, doggone it, here I
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Your parents.
Um, I used to laugh and joke and say, well, I decided I wanted to be a PT because I got hurt one too many times myself. So I was exposed to PT as a profession,
Yeah.
as a high school athlete.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it. I mean, they looked like they were having a lot of fun. I mean, they, really positive community. And I wanted something active. So, I got to use my science, I got to use my math and dig in there, but I knew I didn't want to sit behind a computer all day.
Yeah.
Well, funny. I guess we do a little bit of that too.
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit. Times have changed. So I'm curious, based on that, going to North Carolina, as you mentioned, and you had a very different cultural experience there.
Mhm.
Coming back to Washington, were things different for you having experienced a place like that for 2 or 3 years, however long that you were there?
Mhm.
What's it like coming back now as a physical therapist in a community that you were already familiar with, but now had a different experience?
Mhm. Oh, Rob, that's a good question. There was I came back with a better understanding of who I was and how I wanted to I'm going to say how I wanted to move through life. And that's gosh, that's a good question. Um I wanted to make sure the things that I learned and the pride that I felt with a stronger community, that I took that sense of self, that stronger sense of self and who I was and the pride of who I was, and brought that back with me to Seattle. I didn't want to feel minimized. I didn't want to be pushed to the back. I wanted to be a lot stronger in how I moved through life.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I don't know if that makes sense. Um,
No, it does. I think what it
yeah.
makes me then curious about was, did you encounter any um, difficulties? Isn't necessarily the right word,
Mhm.
but you mentioned growing up in a community that here that communication isn't nearly as direct, or uh,
Mhm.
uh, and so you're coming back to Washington with a different sense of self, and it sounds like a different
Mhm.
assertiveness.
Mhm.
Did you come upon any um, issues or pushback, or I think we all change as people, and we grow through college
Mhm.
and graduate degrees, and just getting older.
Right.
Was that anything? Did you have any experiences, positive or negative, in that regard coming back?
No, I can't say that I did. Nothing nothing overt, negatively. Nothing, significantly positive. Um, you know, as as PTs, I mean, I think in general, we like people. And so the PTs and people that I work with, are always a pretty good group of people.
Hmm.
Um, so, that's coworkers. With patients, there nothing overt negatively.
Mhm.
Sometimes you have a question. Sometimes you might think, huh, that interaction was weird. And then I think, as a person of color, you start to internalize that a little bit. You start to go down the rabbit hole of, well, was it was it me? Did I misread that?
Mhm.
Was that what were they trying to say there? And there's this second layer of guessing that
Mhm.
starts to
Mhm.
happen,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that that's the part that's wearing.
Yeah.
That's the part that's wearing and can happen. uh, you can get those little things that happen almost daily,
Yeah.
and it's so
Excuse me.
based on what
Well,
you're,
that's
so you get
interesting.
used to it.
If you're okay with expanding on that a bit more in the sense of, I think for some people there's an attitude of, why does everything have to be about race? What does this have to do with our profession and the work that we do? And it's not just in physical therapy. I have some good friends who are minorities, but small business owners, and
Yeah.
I've heard from them and seen them experience um, issues where people question why uh, race has anything to do with anything.
Mhm.
What were some of those experiences that made you think about that deeper level? Because I think a, a big part of this is that there's a disconnect that people don't understand. There's a level that we are even going to, or having to question. I think maybe that's one of the
Mhm.
disconnects. It's like we have experiences that make us have to think about those things.
Oh, yeah. Um, I'm gonna pull up because I think this happens quite a bit. I mean, and this can happen weekly, multiple times weekly. You might walk in to see a patient, or you might walk out to the waiting room to get them, and they look at you, and there can be a surprised look. Oh, oh, and as I'm walking them back to the room, they go, they might ask, "So are you my PT? Are you?" Yeah, and I always wonder what the root of that question is, and would this be a question that might be asked to somebody um, who was of their ethnicity? Would they ask that to, of one of the white PTs? Would the assumption be, well, this person is coming to get me, this is my PT?
Mhm.
And I think over the years now, I've morphed into, I specifically say right when I, go get them, hi, my name is, and I'm your PT.
Mhm.
And but there's just enough of those little questions that happen along the way that they kind of eat at you.
Yeah. I had a
Yeah.
similar experience actually when it was outside of the office. Uh,
Hmm.
I went to the grocery store one day during the week, and you're familiar with this about me. Our listeners might not be, but I always wear a shirt and tie to work. This is actually me dressed down right now. I still wear a shirt and tie. This
Yeah.
stems back from my East Coast days. And I walked into a grocery store looking for
Mhm.
whatever after work, and somebody came up to me and asked me, uh, or assumed that I worked there and asked me a question about the grocery store or something related to the grocery store. And I said, no, I
Uh-huh.
don't, I don't work here. And I walked away wondering, oh well, maybe he thought because I had my tie on that I worked in this grocery store. I think it was like a Safeway or something.
Uh-huh.
I did then later on think about, like, would he have asked that question to a white person in a tie? And I
Right.
think for those maybe who haven't had this type of experience, if you're not a person of color, this stuff happens, and we are left to think about it, whether or not it was actually the case or not. it dare I say, torments you to some level of you're now having to deal with this emotion that probably a lot of people don't.
Don't. No, you're right. You are absolutely right. And those little it's those little insults that just build up. They do. They just build up. And it's enough just to, cause question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think, and I appreciate, again, you taking the time and this opportunity, because I think
Hmm.
this is how people get to learn and experience kind of
Hmm.
the ground that we walk, or the path that we walk.
Hmm.
Um, what's one thing perhaps that you wish your colleagues understood more about your experiences?
Well, I do wish my colleagues, and I'm speaking across the board, um, throughout the years. Uh, I do wish that they understood. Yeah, I wish they understood how that felt, or how that feels.
Hmm.
There's an ease with which, and I'm making some assumptions, but there's an ease with which people can move through life, and they don't have to second guess.
Hmm.
And it would be interesting for people to have a better understanding of what that feels like. I'm This reminds me of a story. I had a manager who was a very good manager. I enjoyed working for them, and this manager went with their family on a family trip. They were back in Baltimore. Now, this was at a clinic I worked at here in Seattle. They did a family trip back to the East Coast, kind of the DC area. And they went to eat one night in Baltimore. And I'm going to say this was a white family. And oh, this person, I had to giggle because the image of this just makes me laugh. They were in this restaurant and they look around and they realize that they are the only white family in this restaurant, and it's packed.
Hmm.
And it dawned on them. And when they came back, they said, is this how you feel? Is uh, is this how you feel all the time?
Hmm.
And I said, well, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
I mean, to some degree, yes.
you know
Yeah.
the fact that they share that experience with you is commendable.
Yeah,
That
I
is
thought so.
interesting. Yeah, and I again, I think that I totally agree. I think there are people that kind of walk through life never having had those experiences, so it would never occur to them.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and it doesn't mean that they're racist or insensitive, but if you don't have the experience,
No.
how could you know, right? Uh,
Right,
hence,
right.
you know, this platform. What's one thing that you wish that your patients understood more about DEI, and within that, what do you see our roles as physical therapists? How do we play in this?
Within DEI. Well, our role as PTs, like it or not, our role is to continue to be an ambassador for the profession and for our communities within the profession. That's our role. Uh, what do I wish my patients understood? That's a little trickier because I feel like we have so much less control over over our patients. Um, yeah, I struggled. I thought about that question. I struggled with that one.
Yeah,
I
so
don't have a good answer for that one.
Well, so much of it is situational as well too, and you're
It
trying
is.
to also have a safe and productive space. And if there's anything that I've learned, certainly in the last couple of years
Mm-hmm.
during COVID, I think that it's been a huge
Mm-hmm.
lesson for me as it relates to all of life is meeting people where they're at. Um, and
Absolutely.
and sometimes it's really easy to um, recognize that people are in different places. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but if you want to be constructive, you got to meet people where they're at, because otherwise it's not gonna it's not gonna move
Yeah.
the direction that you want, generally speaking.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I think, yeah, I agree that is a tough thing, and sometimes patients may let something slip or say something that either I may be offended by, or and maybe not intentionally, and it is a weird
Mm-hmm.
space of trying to figure out how to have those conversations sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, with all of this said, are there any simple things that we could do that might have an immediate impact? You mentioned it's our responsibility as a profession, whether we like it or not, and
Mm-hmm.
I think we would all agree that we want to see our profession move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Little things that a simple thing somebody could do on Monday morning when they get into the office. I'll start off for one. You said that, just thinking that somebody may have had a different experience than one you're used to having, like the restaurant.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Uh, I yes, not assuming that everybody's experience is your experience. And I think one of the simplest things that people can do is listen, listen to other people's experiences, listen to their stories, and just accept it for what it is. Whether you think it was right or wrong, whether you think there if there was a malicious intent, or but listen to their experience and accept it for what it is, and understand that that's what that person has experienced.
That's hard, and certainly in the
It
society, in
is.
the world we're living in now, where it's so much about who's got the loudest voice. So it seems like
Yeah.
listening is fallen by the wayside. But this is a great reminder that we all could do a better job. I know I certainly can. Um,
Mhm.
well, Nolana, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I learned some things that I didn't know about some of your experiences,
Mm.
and hopefully, we all have gained a little bit of a different insight into our friends and our colleagues' experiences that may not be
Mhm.
our own. And
Yeah.
I appreciate you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking me to do this.
I'm glad that we could make this happen. All right, Nolana, it was great seeing you, and thanks everybody for listening and watching.